Principal Allen's trial and divorce. I can't believe Crowtoon Productions Incorporated betrayed my trust over the punishments I gave Tripp and most of his friends back at Springfield. It's all his fault I'm in this mess.
You have done that yourself.
Now quit complaining and breaking the fourth wall and wait until it's time for your trial.
Shut up.
Okay, Allen, your trial begins in 30 minutes. Time to go to court.
Fine. Let's get this over with.
At the courthouse.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Alfred Smith.
You may all be seated. All right. Court is now in session. Alan Jones, I am very disappointed that I have to see you in my courthouse like this. The last time you were here, you testified against Tiana 8 months ago. And now there are charges pressed against you for the very reason why you testified against Tiana in the first place. Prosecutor Henry Maverick, read the charges.
Alan Jones, you've been charged for aggravated assault, abuse of power, and child abuse.
How do you plead?
Not guilty, Your Honor. Tripp and his friends deserved the punishments I gave them. Tripp harassed my daughter Serenity, acted racist towards Rocco, Rachel, and Veronica, acted homophobic towards 6 of my former LGBTQ students, and assaulted Akito.
Alan, I understand what Tripp and his gang did, but you could have given them a better punishment such as detention, suspension, or an expulsion. What you did was no better. You've set a bad example for, not just your former students, but your former staff as well. So, I call upon my first witness, Samantha Violet.
Alan, I'm very disappointed in you. You've proven yourself to be a real hypocrite a year before you fired Tiana from Springfield. You're as much of a child abuser as she is, so for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Samantha. I call upon my next witness, Tom Riley.
Alan, in all the times I've worked as a teacher back at Springfield, I never expected you to assault the majority of the Tripp gang for all the trouble they caused at school. I mean, you did the right thing expelling Nash for what he did in the school hallways, but what you did to some of the other members of the Tripp gang was unethical.
Hold it. Mr. Riley, what did Nash do to get expelled?
He looked at explicit content on school grounds. I don't need to specify what it is because it'll be too disturbing for children in the courthouse to hear what it is.
Okay. You may continue.
Gladly. As for you, Alan, assaulting our fellow students is not something you taught us to do. You've allowed child abuse at our own school. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Tom. I call upon my next witness, Hugh Hillman.
I agree with Tom. Alan, the way you did your job as the principal at our old high school was completely unacceptable. It was unethical and unprofessional. You were supposed to discipline the Tripp gang by expelling them whenever they use weapons to assault other students. Not assault them back in return. For that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Hugh. I call upon my next witness, Selena Rosemary.
I agree with Hugh. As a black person myself, I know how it feels to be discriminated against. But assaulting a student is wrong too. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Selena. I call upon my next witness, Eric Adams.
I agree with Mrs. Rosemary. You could have asked Tripp and the other students you assaulted why they caused all that trouble at our old high school, but instead, you assaulted them. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Eric Adams. I call upon my next witness, Walter Kepinson.
Well. Look who finally got arrested.
Walter Kepinson, it's been a while. Let me guess. You just want another rematch?
Objection, Your Honor. Badgering the witness.
Order. No fights allowed in my courthouse.
My apologies, Your Honor. But anyway, Alan Jones was the most delusional muscle-headed brute I've ever met. He tried to take over Knightswood College before I challenged him to a street fight. And even if I defeated him with help from Tripp Wilson and Serenity, Alan's own daughter, that so-called principal never gives up. He's still desperate to take over my college. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Walter, before I go any further with this trial, what made you think you could fight Alan and stop him from stealing your job as the principal of Knightswood College?
I was a professional boxer before I became the principal. Alan may have been admittedly stronger than me at first, but I was able to stand my ground and hold my own against him.
HM, must have taken years of practice for you. I call upon my next witness, Mr. Curkin.
Boxer to boxer, I know what it's like to have Alan as a principal based on what I heard about him. He allowed child abuse at the very school he worked at before it got shut down. Yes, Tripp and most of his friends got violent towards their fellow students, especially their former bullies, but Alan used violence as a misguided means of discipline.
And how would you know how to deal with students who use weapons for assault on school grounds?
Despite the amount of roughhousing going on at Starcadia Bay, I have a zero-tolerance policy against it. No matter who starts a fight, I'm fair but firm with all my students. You, on the other hand, are one-sided. You punished Tripp and his friends without giving them a chance to explain themselves. And you treated them as if they're worthless. So if anything, you're a menace to society when it comes to discipline. Therefore, I say you're guilty.
Okay, Mr. Curkin. I think you made your point.
I was done anyway, Your Honor.
Well, in that case, may I call Ryo Tanaka up to the stand, please?
Alan Jones is as much of a gaslighter as a former fellow police officer of mine in particular. He dragged me and Charles Martel into a few mass assaults back at Springfield.
Rhea, how could you be against me on this? Tripp and Alexine assaulted your son Akio, and Deegan and Simona messed with your daughter Sakura.
I may have been crossed with those four for what they did to Akio and Sakura, and I may have had my wife Chio and Akio assault Tripp and Alexine in prison back at Springfield. But after when they told me about that apology video made by Sage, Vincent, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax, Chio and I realized our mistake. From what I heard, Tripp, Deacon, and Kaden were all bullied by the same four boys my kids mentioned prior to high school. As for Annex and Nexer, they were bullied by Dax and Zeke. But you, Alan, you never gave them a chance to explain their side of the story when they had the chance. So for everything I just mentioned, I say you're guilty.
Wait a minute. Ryo, you had Chio and Akio assault Tripp and Alexine when they were in prison.
Yeah, but looking back on that, I realized that we've gone too far. So my wife and I allowed our four eldest kids to apologize to not just Tripp and Alexine, but Deacon too.
Okay, Ryo, well, I'm glad you decided to own up to your past actions. I'll let you go with a warning. If you resort to violence against anyone like that ever again, you'll be arrested and stripped of your position as a police officer. You understand?
Yes, I do.
All right. Moving on. I call upon my next witness, Chio Tanaka.
Adding on to what my husband just said, Alan manipulated him and Charles into helping him assault not just Tripp, Alexine, Kaden, Annex and Nexar, but Lena and Aurora too. Yes, Tripp and Alexine assaulted Akio and Deacon and Simona assaulted Sakura, but there was a reason behind most of the Tripp gang's bad behavior. Most of them were victims of child abuse and bullying. Therefore, I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Chio. I call upon my next witness, Akio Tanaka.
Look. Mr. Jones, I know Tripp and Alexine assaulted me out of racism. Believe me, my family was cross with them for it, but you tricked my dad into assaulting them in return. And ever since I saw that apology video made by four of Tripp's bullies, I felt bad for him and Deacon. And also Kaden, because he was also bullied by the same guys. So for gaslighting me and my parents into assaulting Tripp and Alexine, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Akio. I call upon my next witness, Sakura Tanaka.
Adding on to what Akio said, Mr. Jones expelled Deacon and Simona for what they did to me and for trying to kill Sage and Abigail with a ruby dagger without seeing the big picture. The mass assault scenario that was planned against Deacon and Simona was all orchestrated by his own dad. Mr. Buford even framed Sage and Vincent's dad for corrupting the police. And since Serenity's dad had his hand at getting Deacon and Simona expelled, arrested, and disowned, I say he's guilty.
Oh my. It sounds like the defendant is conspiring with another convict.
Objection, Your Honor. I was never aware of Deacon and Simona getting disowned by their parents the day I expelled them from high school. That happened without my knowledge.
I may sustain your objection, but I also agree with Sakura. You still expelled Deacon and Simona, while disregarding the fact that they were victims of child abuse and bullying. Hence, your judgment has been clouded by your hatred against Trip and his friends. So with that, I call upon my next witness, Ren Tanaka.
I agree with Akio and Sakura. I say our former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Ren. I call upon my next witness, Sara Tanaka.
Mr. Jones set a bad example for us and all of our friends back at Springfield when he started off a mass assault against Kaden for assaulting Serenity herself. And since he also tricked my dad into helping him assault Trip and Alexine for assaulting my brother Akio, he made my dad set a bad example for our younger siblings. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Sara. I call upon my next witness, Kenji Tanaka.
I agree with Sora. I'm very disappointed in their principal. He did nothing to help Trip and his friends. So for that, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Kenji. I call upon my next witness, Hiroshi Tanaka.
I agree with Kenji. I say Mr. Jones is guilty as charged.
Thank you, Hiroshi. I call upon my next witness, Akira Tanaka.
I agree with Kenji and Hiroshi. I would not want to have Serenity's dad as my principal when I attend high school either. So for everything he did, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Akira. I call upon my next witness, Seth Madison.
Alan, I'm very disappointed in you. After getting Rhonda suspended for attempting to cut school upon getting there late for the 5th time, you assaulted most of the Trip gang. Crikey. Seriously? Do you even know how serious of a crime child abuse is? You broke all of their bones and left them in severe pain. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Seth. I call upon my next witness, Vivian Madison.
I agree with my husband. Alan, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. It's bad enough that Tiana got exposed for abusing Stephanie and Natalie, but this. You've lost your mind. Seth and I may ground Wanda for all the trouble she caused, but we would never abuse her the way you did the majority of the Trip gang. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Vivian. I call upon my next witness, Wanda Madison.
Principal Allen, I've got a bone to pick with you. First you suspended me from high school for trying to skip it, and now you committed child abuse against most of the Trip gang? Dude, you've really crossed a line here. You treated Trip and his friends much worse than you did me.
Tell me one reason why you're any better than them. You're the one who tried to cut school and got delayed for the 5th time.
True, but that's nothing compared to what you and Stephanie's mom did, you big brute.
Oh, I'll show you a big brute, you little.
Alan Jones, you will not lay one single finger on that young girl. Now go back to where you were before.
Consider yourself lucky, Wanda. I would have shut you up for good.
I would have had my say if you'd simply given me a chance to explain myself, but like me, you never gave Trip or any of his friends a chance to explain themselves. So for everything I just said, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Wanda. I call upon my next witness, Wyatt Hightower.
Look, Alan, I get it. Opal broke up with Kaden because of all the stuff he did prior to trying to assault Indigo and assaulting Serenity the day you expelled him from high school. And I'm also upset about Opal getting assaulted by Kaden and the Bloody Knights in return for everything that happened to him back at Springfield. But if I did the same thing you did, I would have been in the same position as you. Getting arrested and divorced.
Oh, come on. You would have told Kaden's parents too if you were in my shoes. Why defend Kaden if you know what he did?
Because Kaden's parents were one of the main reasons why he was a troublemaker in the first place. They've been physically abusing and neglecting him for years. The other reason was because he was bullied by the same people who bullied Trip and Deacon. Sage, Vincent, Luke, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax. And the fact that Kaden assaulted Serenity does not justify you assaulting him in return. You could have just expelled him and nothing more. But you added to all the abuse his parents put him through. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Wyatt, I guess. I call upon my next witness, Glow Hightower.
I'd have to agree with my husband on this one. Sure, Kaden assaulted Opal in retaliation for breaking up with him without knowing he was a victim of child abuse, but we would have filed a restraining order because of that. But since Opal reconciled with Kaden and offered to help testify against his parents, there is no need to do so anyway. And what you did, Alan, makes you no better than them. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Glow. I call upon my next witness, Opal Hightower.
I couldn't forgive Kaden for all the trouble he caused, but that was before I found out the truth about his past. And the mass assault against him added to his trauma. And since Serenity's dad started that assault over what Kaden did to her, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Opal. I call upon my next witness, Octavius Hightower.
You know, Principal Allen, I'd expect this sort of thing to be committed by Nash when he assaulted my younger sisters Moxie and Cassidy, but you of all people should know better. Assaulting my older sister's ex-boyfriend? All because he assaulted Serenity? Not cool. You should be ashamed of yourself. And I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Octavius. I call upon my next witness, Finley Hightower.
I agree with my brother Octavius. I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Finley. I call upon my next witness, Moxie Hightower.
You know, I'm actually really surprised. I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. It's bad enough that Cassidy and I got assaulted by Nash, but my older sister's former principal committed child abuse against her ex-boyfriend and some of his friends. I don't know which is worse, but I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Moxie. I call upon my next witness, Cassidy Hightower.
I agree with Moxie. This is so messed up. So for everything my older sister's former principal has done, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Cassidy. I call upon my next witness, Jet Burton.
Okay, Alan, I know the Trip Gang caused trouble that's much worse compared to my 3 eldest sons egging Angel Rider 6's house even though he's no better. But assaulting Trip, Kaden, Alexine, Annex, and Nexa, and Lena and Aurora is no better than them assaulting Akio, Dax, and Zeke, Nala and Gwen, and Serenity. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Jet. I call upon my next witness, Harp Burton.
I agree with my husband. I say Alan's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Harp. I call upon my next witness, Jonah Burton.
I agree with my parents. Sure, Kaden and the Bloody Knights assaulted me and my girlfriend Opal all because she broke up with him over all the trouble he caused, but I understood why he did that. Neither of us knew that Kaden got bullied by Sage, Vincent, Luke, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax. And we didn't know that his parents were abusing him either. But ever since Kaden assaulted Serenity, her father took it too far when her mother told him what happened. He got so angry up to the point where he brutally assaulted him. The worst thing is, he got us and the rest of the Sage crew involved in that mass assault against Kaden at the school hallways. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Jonah. I call upon my next witness, Gunnar Burton.
I agree with Jonah. Mr. Jones, I know Kaden assaulted Serenity and I'm upset about that too, but you took it a little too far by having me and my friends assault him in return. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Gunnar. I call upon my next witness, Maximus Burton.
I agree with Gunnar. I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Maximus. I call upon my next witness, Calvin Burton.
I agree with my brothers. I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Calvin. I call upon my next witness, Riverbell.
You know, Alan, I definitely get why Lemon and Lime were involved in that mass assault against Trip and Alexine, but those two didn't deserve it. Trip got bullied by Sage, Vincent, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax when they were kids, all because he dreamed about becoming a wrestler despite the fact his family was poor. As for Alexine, even though she accompanied Trip into assaulting Akio, you went too far by assaulting her in return, let alone assaulting a female student. And for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, River. I call upon my next witness, Kendall Bell.
I agree with my husband. Sure, Trip teamed up with Timothy Ortiz to harass our twin daughters, but committing child abuse against him, let alone on school grounds, is wrong too. And for that, Ellen, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Kendall. I call upon my next witness, Brittany Bell.
I'm jealous of Lemon and Lime because they would never cause trouble, but I couldn't believe our former principal dragged them into a mass assault against Trip and Alexine. Sure, my younger twin sisters were also involved in a mass assault against Trip, which was orchestrated by Sage, but Mr. Jones was the one behind most of the mass assaults. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Brittany. I call upon my next two witnesses, Lemon and Lime Bell.
Trip may have tried to mess with me and my twin sister with Timothy's assistance, but upon hearing that he got bullied prior to high school, we felt bad for him. But ever since Kaden assaulted Serenity, her dad's been getting us and our friends involved in all the mass assaults that occurred on school grounds. I agree with Lemon. This has gone too far. So for everything she just mentioned, I speak for the both of us when I say that our former principal is guilty as charged.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next witness, Charles Myrtle.
Charles, you're testifying against me.
Sorry, Alan, but you brought this on yourself. Your Honor, Alan's been the brains behind all the mass assaults that took place at my son's old high school. I may have also been involved in that mass assault against Deacon and Simona, but I was mainly dragged into those other mass assaults against Trip and most of his friends. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Crikey! You, traitor. You'll pay for this, Charles. I mean it.
Not so fast. Stay where you are right now, and don't even think about attacking the witness. Or else I'll hold you in contempt of court.
As you wish, Your Honor.
Now then, I call upon my next witness, Lily Myrtle.
I agree with my husband. Tripp suffered enough ever since our sons bullied him with assistance from Luke Ribera, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax. But aside from that, Alan added more to the abuse Tripp's gone through with that mass assault because Curtis and Winter were also abusing him. He's been assaulted and neglected. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Lily. I call upon my next witness, Sage Myrtle.
I admit that I bullied Trip, Deacon, and Kaden with help from my brother and 3 of my friends, but I myself was dragged into most of the mass assaults against him and his gang. And all the mass assaults that happened at my old high school were planned out by my former principal, Serenity's dad. My dad and former teachers were also dragged into it. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Sage. I call upon my next witness, Vincent Myrtle.
I agree with Sage. Despite the fact I wasn't aware of him giving Kaden a swirly and throwing him down the stairs at school, our former principals know better. So I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Vincent. I call upon my next witness, Landon Dale.
Alan's a bad principal. He orchestrated most of the mass assaults against Trip and his gang. My first son may have bullied him along with Deacon and Kaden, but Alan did much worse. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Landon. I call upon my next witness, Kend Dale.
I agree with my husband. I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Kendra. I call upon my next witness, Michael Dale.
I may have bullied Trip, Deacon, and Kaden in the past, and Kaden tried to assault my younger sister, but Mr. Jones went a little too far by assaulting him and Trip. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Michael. I call upon my next witness, Indigo Dale.
I agree with Michael. Sure, he bullied the one guy who tried to assault me, but their former principal went too far by assaulting the latter. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Indigo. I call upon my next witness, Mason Dale.
I agree with Indigo. And since my older brother already buried the hatchet with Kaden, I say that their former principal's guilty.
Thank you, Mason. I call upon my next witness, Frederick Halifax.
My son Dustin may have bullied Trip along with Deacon and Kaden, but he had no intention of getting involved in those mass assaults against any of them. As for Alan, all the mass assaults against Trip and most of his friends were his idea. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Frederick. I call upon my next witness, Tracy Halifax.
I agree with my husband. I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Tracy. I call upon my next witness, Dustin Halifax.
My former principal's out of his mind. He got me and my friends involved in all the mass assaults against Trip and most of his friends back at high school. I may have bullied Trip in the past, maybe Deacon and Caden too, but what Mr. Jones did was worse compared to what I did to the three of them. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Dustin. I call upon my next witness, Dexter Dash.
Deacon may have messed with my son Weston and my daughter Mackenzie, but Alan expelled him and Simona without seeing the big picture about that mass assault against them. Former Springfield police officer Sean Buford orchestrated that mass assault against his own son as a punishment for ruining Sage's 17th birthday and framed Charles Martel for it. And aside from blindly expelling Deacon and Simona, Alan also assaulted Trip twice, and Alexine, Annex and Nexer, Lena and Aurora, and Kaden one by one and got my nephew involved. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Dexter. I call upon my next witness, Annabelle Dash.
I agree with Dexter. These mass assaults have gone too far. So I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Annabelle. I call upon my next witness, Weston Dash.
Principal Allen, I know Trip acted racist towards my girlfriend and I'm not happy about that, but assaulting him and getting me and my cousin involved in it is going too far. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Weston. I call upon my next witness, Mackenzie Dash.
I agree with Weston. I say our former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I call upon my next witness, Francis Everett.
Aside from getting Charles and Rio involved in the mass assault against Trip and Alexine, he did the same thing to me and Navy against the Sullivan sisters and Keating brothers. But Alan couldn't see the big picture behind this whole thing between them, my sons, and the Alinsky sisters. Dax and Z bullied Annex and Nexer when they were kids.
What? Your sons bullied Annex and Nexer when they were kids? What did they ever do to them?
Dax and Z made fun of Annex and Nexer and called them soft doll because they wore glasses. They also broke their glasses and pushed them down the stairs at school. And worst of all, Dax and Z humiliated Annex and Nexer by dressing them up as My Little Pony characters. It got them up to the point where Annex and Nexer wanted revenge. But since Alan assaulted Annex and Nexer along with Lena and Aurora and dragged me and my wife into it, I say he's guilty.
Whoa, that's insane.
Yeah, but on the bright side, Navy and I had a stern talk with our sons and they buried the hatch with the Keating brothers. So they're on good terms now.
That's good, Francis. May I call Navy Everett up to the stand, please?
I agree with Francis. I say Alan's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Navy. I call upon my next two witnesses, Dax and Zeke Everett.
It's true that Zeke and I bullied Annex and Nexer, and that they and their exes framed us and our exes for insulting Mr. Hillman on the board and assaulted all four of us. But what our former principal did was no better. I agree with Dax. And the worst thing is, our parents helped our former principal against their will. They were dragged into the mass assault against the two guys we used to bully. Lena and Aurora never wanted to get involved in their ex's grudge against us. And they never had anything against Nellie and Gwen. Therefore, I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next witness, Keith Alinsky.
Alan also got me and my wife Lucy involved in that mass assault against the Sullivan sisters and the Keating brothers. All because they assaulted our daughters and their exes. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Keith. I call upon my next witness, Lucy Alinsky.
I agree with Keith. I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Lucy Alinsky. I call upon my next two witnesses, Nala and Gwen Alinsky.
It's true that our boyfriends Annex and Nexer assaulted our exes and that Lena and Aurora assaulted me and my sister, but our former principal took it too far. I agree with Nala. Lena and Aurora never wanted to get involved in our boyfriends' grudges against our exes. And they never had anything against us. And since Mr. Jones got our parents involved in that four-way mass assault, I speak for myself and my sister when I say he's guilty.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next witness, Richard Rivera.
I always thought that Sage was a bad influence to my oldest son Luke, but what happened during the 2021 to 2022 school year was much worse. Alan got both of them involved in a bunch of mass assaults against not only those of the guys they bullied, but most of their amigos too. C-Trip and his amigos cut ties with Nash because he looked at explicit content in the school hallways. But Alan violated the school policy against violence by assaulting most of them. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Richard. I call upon my next witness, Ariana Rivera.
I agree with Richard. Alan was an even worse influence than Sage was to Luke. So I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Ariana. I call upon my next witness, Luke Rivera.
My former principal's gone plumb loco. He got me and my amigos involved in a bunch of mass assaults against Trip, Alexine, Alex and Nexera, Netta and Aurora, and Kaden. Sage being a bad influence to me prior to high school was bad enough as it is, and so was the first very mass assault I got involved in against Trip, but this is even worse. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Luke. I call upon my next witness, CJ Rivera.
I agree with Luke. I say his former principal's guilty.
Thank you, CJ. I call upon my next witness, Bennett Carter.
I know my daughter Victoria assaulted Samantha before finding out what Pierre has been doing to the latter. But Alan dragged the former, along with her boyfriend Luke and most of their friends, into all the mass assaults that happened on school grounds against Trip and most of his gang. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Bennett. I call upon my next witness, Ava Carter.
I agree with Bennett. I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Ava. I call upon my next witness, Neville Carter.
I may have messed with my little sister by placing a virus on her computer and blaming it on our parents, but I would never do what her former principal did 2 to 3 years ago. Sure, Trip and his friends caused trouble that was somewhat more serious than I ever did, but what Alan did to him and most of his friends was child abuse. So I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Neville. I call upon my next witness, Victoria Carter.
Mr. Jones made me and all of my friends even bigger fools than we thought Sage and Vincent ever could. He dragged all of us into all the mass assaults that took place back at our old high school and got Mr. Martel, Mr. and Mrs. Selinsky, Mr. Tanaka, and our former teachers involved. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Victoria. I call upon my next witness, Ethan Cassidy.
It was bad enough that Charlotte and I got involved in that mass assault war against Deacon and Simona along with our daughter Abigail. But to have Alan orchestrate the rest of the mass assaults against Trip and most of his friends? That's wrong. So for that, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Ethan. I call upon my next witness, Charlotte Cassidy.
I agree with Ethan. Alan's gone bonkers. So I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Charlotte. I call upon my next witness, Abigail Cassidy.
Even though my ex dragged me into the first mass assault war against Trip, our former principal started this whole thing where Trip gets assaulted on school grounds. And since Sage made a deal with Trip to turn against Mr. Jones, I say that muscle-headed psycho's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Abigail. I call upon my next witness, Patrick Westbrook.
Alexine may have bullied my daughter Ruby and assaulted Akio alongside Trip, but Alan went too far by getting the latter involved in that mass assault over Akio getting assaulted. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Patrick. I call upon my next witness, Sadie Westbrook.
I agree with Patrick. Racism and child abuse are both serious offenses. So I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Sadie. I call upon my next witness, Ruby Westbrook.
Yes, Alexine bullied me in the past. She even helped Trip assault Akio, but I had no intention of getting involved in any of those mass assaults against them and their friends. Sage may have planned the first mass assault against Trip, but Mr. Jones was the brains behind most of them. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Ruby. I call upon my next witness, Carson Whitelock.
Trip and his friends may have caused a lot of trouble back at Springfield, but he and most of his friends suffered too much pain because of their parents and Principal Alan. Therefore, I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Carson. I call upon my next witness, Madison Whitelock.
I agree with Carson. I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Madison. I call upon my next witness, Penelope Whitelock.
Destin may have bullied Trip, Deacon, and Kaden, but our former principal crossed the line when he assaulted Trip and Kaden for assaulting Akio and Serenity respectively. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Penelope. I call upon my next witness, Diesel Gavin.
Alan, I'm very disappointed in you right now. First you fired my ex for abusing our kids, and now you got arrested for dragging my daughter Stephanie into a bunch of mass assaults.
Hey, don't judge me. Tiana had Stephanie give Trip a taste of his own medicine for kicking her in the face. I'm not the only one who got her involved in a violent revenge scheme.
Well, it's true, but after when Stephanie told me about that video Sage, Vincent, Michael Dale, and Dustin Halifax made, she made amends with Trip and his friends. And since you committed the same sort of crime you got my ex fired for by orchestrating most of those mass assaults against the Trip gang, I say you're guilty.
Okay, Diesel. Thank you for your testimony. I call upon my next witness, Eric Gavin.
I agree with my dad, Mr. Jones. You were more of a bad influence than Sage was when he got Stephanie involved in that very first mass assault against Trip, so I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Eric. I call upon my next witness, Stephanie Gavin.
I get that my mom had me kick Trip in the face, but I regretted it ever since I found out that he along with Deacon and Kaden got bullied by Sage, Vincent, Luke, my ex, and Dustin. And yes, Kaden assaulted Serenity and tried to hurt Michael's younger sister Indigo, but he and the others were also victims of child abuse. You should have given them the benefit of the doubt. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Stephanie. I call upon my next witness, Natalie Gavin.
I gotta hand it to you, Mr. Jones. You're a real hypocrite and a piece of work. I know Kaden messed with me twice, the second time in Bradley Animation's 2K6 channel. But when I heard that some of her former classmates bullied him along with Trip and Deacon, I began to feel bad for him. So for all the stuff you did, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Natalie. I call upon my next witness, Terrence Gavin.
I agree with Natalie. I say our sister's former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Terrence. I call upon my next witness, Elizabeth Gavin.
I agree with Terrence. I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I call upon my next witness, Joseph Gavin.
I'm with Elizabeth on this one. I say Stephanie's former principal's guilty.
Thank you, Joseph. I call upon my next witness, George McCall.
You know, Alan, when my wife and I got lucid and enrolled at your school, we didn't expect you to get her involved in a bunch of mass assaults on school grounds. You've set a bad example for both our daughters. So for everything you've done to Trip and most of his friends, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, George. I call upon my next witness, Sonia McCall.
I agree with George. It was bad enough that Tiana grounded Stephanie for hanging out with her ex, my daughter Lucy, and their friend Zara, but to have you assault the Trip gang? You've really screwed up this time, Alan. So for getting Lucy and the rest of her friends involved in all those mass assaults back at Springfield High School, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Sonia. I call upon my next witness, Lucy McCall.
Sure, Sage got me involved in the first mass assault against Trip all because the latter threw a glass bottle at the former and gave Vincent a concussion. But we were all dragged into all the mass assaults that occurred on school grounds against not just Trip, but most of his friends. And it all started when he assaulted Kaden all because the latter assaulted Serenity with a baton. Therefore, I say my former principal's guilty.
Thank you, Lucy McCall. I call upon the first main victim of the crime, Trip Wilson.
Mr. Jones has been treating me and my friends very badly. He assaulted me twice. First he beat me up for harassing Serenity and then he did it to me and my girlfriend for assaulting Akio. I regretted doing all that stuff, but he added to all the abuse my parents put me through back home. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Trip. Just remember, it's not nice to act racist to people of all races and colors. You understand?
Yes, Your Honor.
Good. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Alexine Davis.
Even though Mr. Jones never got involved in the mass assault war against my best friend Simona and her ex-deacon, he's been a real misogynist towards us and the Sullivan sisters. And since he went as far as beating me and my boyfriend up for assaulting Akio, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Alexine. I call upon my next witness, Cody Davis.
I agree with my elder sister. I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Cody. I call upon my next witness, Julian Davis.
I agree with my brother. I say our sister's former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Julian. I call upon the next main victim of the crime, Kaden Concord.
You assaulted my daughter. How could you be out of prison after everything you've done?
Alan, give Kaden a chance to speak.
Thanks, Your Honor. Anyway, yes, Mr. Jones, I assaulted Serenity. But I did it because I've been having anger issues over not just getting assaulted, but I've been abused by my parents and bullied by the Martell brothers and 3 of their friends. As for the baton I used to assault Serenity, it was never mine to begin with. It was one of the weapons my parents used to assault me numerous times back home. And you left me even more traumatized than before when you assaulted me in retaliation for what I did to her. I've been having suicidal thoughts and suffering from PTSD for years. I wanted to kill myself because of all the pain I've suffered because of everyone who did me wrong. And since you were one of those people, Mr. Jones, I say you're guilty.
Suicide? Kaden, you actually had suicidal thoughts. And your parents abused you all those years? Even before you assaulted Serenity. I don't believe this.
Look at you. Now you want to show me some sympathy after 2 long years upon assaulting me for all the trouble I caused? You disgust me. You know what? I can't even look at you, you sick monster.
Oh dear. I've never seen someone so broken before. May I call Stan Smith up to the stand, please?
Huh? Who's Stan Smith? That would be me. I'm Kaden's biological uncle. I'm also the brother of the woman who abused her own son. As for you, Alan, you're no better. Mr. Smith, sir, with all due respect, your nephew assaulted my daughter. He even tried to hurt Indigo, Michael Dale's younger sister. Look. I know what my nephew did, and I'm sorry for your daughter, but 2 wrongs don't make a right. If you'd known what he's gone through, you could have gotten him some help. I used to be married to someone who abused one of my sons. And she took full custody of him by bribing the judge where I came from and framed me for everything she did to him. You and my sister are just as bad as my late ex, who died of cancer after all the years she spent abusing my son Michael. So for assaulting my nephew, I say you're guilty.
My word. Stan, I'm so sorry to hear about your son. I hope he's okay. I call upon my next witness, Jessica Smith Andrea.
I agree with Stan. I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Jessica. I call upon my next witness, Samuel Smith Andrea.
I agree with my mom and stepdad. I say my step-cousin's former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Samuel. I call upon my next witness, Adriana Smith Andrea.
I'm on the same page as my brother. Mr. Jones is guilty as charged.
Thank you, Adriana. I call upon my next witness, Michael Daniel Smith.
I also agree with my older step-siblings. I say my cousin's former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Michael Smith. I call upon my next witness, Jonathan Smith.
I agree with my family. I say Mr. Jones is guilty as well.
Thank you, John. I call upon the next 2 main victims of the crime, Annex and Nexa Keating.
Mr. Jones was the worst principal Nexer and I ever had, and he's as bad as our parents. He brutally assaulted us and our exes over what we did to our childhood bullies and our new girlfriends. And what's worse, he got the Everett and Alinsky parents in trouble for it. I agree with NX. So in conclusion, I speak for the both of us when I say our former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, boys. I call upon my next witness, Ivan Sullivan.
Even though Pierre did much worse to Samantha, Alan has been misogynistic towards my daughters, especially when he assaulted them and their ex-boyfriends 2 years ago. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Ivan. I call upon my next witness, Emily Sullivan.
I agree with Ivan. I say Alan's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Emily. I call upon the next 2 victims of the crime, Lena and Doris Sullivan.
Aside from beating me and my sister up, Mr. Jones called us stupid when Stephanie's mom took us, along with Cherry, Samantha, Simona, and Maxine, over to his office. He may have claimed that we had no remorse for any of our actions from our time back at Springfield,
but he's one to talk because he had no remorse for assaulting us. I agree with Lena. What Mr. Jones did to us was incredibly stupid and out of line. Therefore, I speak for the both of us when I say he's guilty.
Thank you, girls. I call upon my next witness, Rodrigo Evans.
My eldest son Osiris may have caused trouble in the past alongside Trip and the rest of their disbanded gang, but Alan went too far by assaulting most of them. Sure, my wife Gia and I gave Osiris a belt beating for helping Nash sabotage Stephanie's date with her ex, but we would never go as far as assaulting him more often than that. As for Alan, he treated most of Osiris's friends very badly without even realizing that those friends of his were victims of both bullying and child abuse. So I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I call upon my next witness, Gia Evans.
I agree with Rodrigo. I say that Alan's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Gia. I call upon my next witness, Osiris Evans.
Principal Alan's been treating most of my friends just as badly as their parents have. He assaulted Trip twice. First for harassing Serenity, and then for assaulting Archeo. Then he assaulted Alexine for the same reason he did Trip. And finally, he did the same thing to Kaden, an ex, Nexa, Lena, and Aurora for completely different reasons. And for that, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Osiris. I call upon my next witness, Justin Evans.
I agree with Osiris. Alexine and Simona may have bullied me and my best friend Phoenix over our disabilities, but they were both victims of child abuse. Principal Alan added more to the abuse Alexine suffered when he assaulted her over what she and Trip did to Archeo. So I'm as disappointed as my parents are. And I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Justin. I call upon my next witness, Caleb Evans.
I agree with my older brothers. I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Caleb. I call upon my next witness, Claire Evans.
I'm on the same page as Caleb. I say Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Claire. I call upon my next witness, Megan Evans.
Same here. Mr. Jones is a bad man. He's a very, very bad man. Guilty, 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 guilty.
Thank you, Megan. I call upon my next witness, Tyree Armandis.
Valentina may have caused trouble with her boyfriend Osiris and the rest of Trip's gang, but none of the stuff most of her friends did is a reason for Alan to assault them.
And just how would you know how to raise Valentina?
For your information, Valentina lost her biological parents when she was a kid. Blair and I felt sorry for her because of that. So we decided to raise her as our own daughter. Yes, she crashed our former creator's Christmas party a few years ago and caused trouble on Halloween around the same time frame, but she was only grieving over her loss. That's why Blair and I don't abuse her whenever she causes trouble. So what you did to Trip and most of their friends was a serious crime. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Oh dear. Tari, that's the most tragic backstory I've ever heard. I feel bad for your adoptive daughter. But at least you and Blair raised her properly. Speaking of which, may I call Blair Darmandis up to the stand, please?
I agree with Kyrie. I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Blair. I call upon my next witness, Valentina Darmandis.
Principal Alan, what you did to most of my friends, including Trip, was completely unacceptable. You treated most of us very badly. Sure, you did the right thing expelling Nash for what he did, but you had no right to assault Trip and his girlfriend Alexine, or Kaden, or even Annex and Nexer or Lena and Aurora. You disregarded all of us who had a tragic backstory and committed child abuse in our own high school. So for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Valentina. By the way, I'm sorry to hear about your biological parents.
Yeah, I miss my biological parents. I'm just glad that my adoptive parents have been treating me fairly. They even allowed me to seek therapy to help me cope with my grief.
That's good to hear. You'll need all the help you can get. I call upon my next witness, Leopold Bailey.
It's one thing for Tiana to threaten to beat my daughter up the next time either she, her girlfriend Samantha, Alexine, Simona, or Lena and Aurora disrespected any of the Gavins. But for Alan to brutally assault not just Alexine and the Sullivan sisters, but Trip, Kaden, and Annex and Nexer too? That's even worse. Listen, I would never do that to Cherry. So I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Leopold. I call upon my next witness, Bliss Bailey.
I agree with Leopold. I say Alan's guilty.
Thank you, Bliss. I call upon my next witness, Cherry Bailey.
Principal Allen, it was bad enough that you didn't stop Stephanie's mom from threatening to beat me, my girlfriend Samantha, and 4 of our friends up the next time we insult her. But to brutally assault not just Alexine, Lena and Aurora, but Trip, Kaden, and Annex and Nexer as well. That was the worst thing you've ever done, you big brute. You have totally crossed the line this time, Buster. And for that, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Cherry. I call upon my next witness, Irvin Pitts.
It's bad enough that Sean Buford framed Charles Martel for a police corruption scandal, but to have Alan Jones brutally assault Tripp and most of his friends? That's even worse. Alan's nothing but a corrupt principal and a traitor to society. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Irvin. I call upon my next witness, Lisa Statham Pitts.
Alan, I'm very disappointed in you. It was bad enough that Tiana recruited my ex to join the Punishers back in September 2023. But to find out that you assaulted most of Samantha's friends, including Tripp. Are you out of your mind? You know what? Never mind. That was a rhetorical question. I mean, it's too obvious that you're guilty as charged.
Thank you, Lisa. I call upon my next witness, Gerald Webster Pitts.
Sage may have bullied some of Samantha's friends, but Mr. Jones dragged him, Vincent, and their friends into all the mass assaults that occurred on school grounds. If anything, what our former principal did was much worse compared to the way Sage, Vincent, Michael Dale, Dustin Halifax, and Luke treated Tripp, Deacon, and Caden. Even though that corrupt principal's not as bad as my former father, I say the former's guilty.
Thank you, Gerald. I call upon my next witness, Dylan Pitts.
I agree with my stepbrother. I say that Mr. Jones is guilty.
Thank you, Dylan. I call upon my next witness, Samantha Webster Pitts.
You know, Mr. Jones, you didn't treat me and Cherry as badly as you did Tripp and the others. But assaulting him, his girlfriend Alexine, Kaden, and the Keating brothers and Sullivan sisters is just as bad as allowing Stephanie's mom to threaten to beat us up. And by us, I mean myself, Cherry, Lena, and Aurora, Alexine, and Simona. So for all the stuff you did, I say you're guilty.
Thank you, Samantha. I call upon my next witness, Savannah Webster Pitts.
I agree with my twin sister. I say Serenity's dad's guilty.
Thank you, Savannah. I call upon my next witness, Carson Pitts.
I'm on the same page as my older brother and step-siblings. I say Samantha's former principal's guilty as charged.
Thank you, Carson. I call upon my next witness, Ramona Pitts.
Samantha's former principal's a very bad man. I say he's guilty. Guilty, 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 guilty.
Thank you, Ramona. I call upon my next witness, Damian Pitts.
You know, before my former creator got exposed for doing something inappropriate on Discord, I thought that Sage was a racist hunk of junk. But now I'm beginning to realize that his former principal's been a bad influence during the 2021 to 2022 school year back at Springfield. So I speak for the Dex crew and my extended family when I find Mr. Jones guilty.
Thank you, Damien. I call upon my next witness, Savannah Buford.
What? Savannah Buford's testifying against me?
Got that right.
How could you be against me on this? Your son and Simona committed an attempted murder.
Yes, I admit that I disowned Deacon the day you got him and Simona expelled for that mass assault war between them and the Sage crew, but you didn't see the big picture. My ex planned that whole thing behind my back as a punishment for ruining Sage's 17th birthday. Therefore, I was tricked into disowning Deacon under false pretenses. So for assaulting most of Deacon's friends, I say you're guilty. And I'll be testifying against my ex-husband the day he stands trial.
Okay, Savannah. But I'll let you off with a warning. Next time, you need to treat Deacon with more respect and support him. And take into consideration how miserable he was.
Okay, Your Honor. I promise.
Good. I call upon my next witness, Deacon Buford.
You want to know why Sage and his friends have been getting backlash for everything I've been through, Principal Allen? Because you only listened to one side of the story. You never understood why I went through what I've done up to 2022. My dad's been abusing me and using his job as a police officer as an excuse. And long before I buried the hatchet with Sage and Vincent, they along with Michael Dale, Dustin Halifax, and Luke Rivera bullied me just for having long hair. I had to cut my hair short because of that. And since you got me and my ex-girlfriend expelled and let my dad disown me and trick my mom into doing the same thing, I say you're guilty.
Oh dear. Deacon, I'm so sorry to hear how rough your life's been. You didn't deserve any of that. I call upon my next witness, Maria Reeston.
I agree with Deacon and his mother. Alan expelled him and my daughter Simona without taking into consideration why they did all the stuff they did in the past. It's almost as bad as letting Deanna threaten to beat her, Alexine, Samantha, Cherry, and Lena and Aurora senseless if they ever disrespected any of the Gavins again. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Maria. I call upon my next witness, Simona Reeston.
Adding on to what my mom just said, my former principal never even considered the fact that my dad's been abusing me and forcing my mom and my sister to hate me. I felt bad about disrespecting Stephanie and her sister Natalie when I found out that their mom abused them and their siblings back home in other channels, including this one. But because Mr. Jones allowed that psycho Karen to threaten to beat me, my best friend Alexine, Cherry, Samantha, and Lena and Aurora senseless before firing her, he's a hypocrite. And after getting me and my ex-boyfriend Deacon expelled, he beat up not just Alexine, Lena, and Aurora, but Trip, Kaden, and Annex and Nexer. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Holy moly! I cannot believe what I just heard. Alan, you are quite a misogynistic corrupt principal. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. And since Simona's finished with her testimony, I call Adriana Reeston up to the stand.
I agree with Simona and our mom. I say Serenity's dad's guilty.
Thank you, Adriana. I call upon the last main victim of the crime, Doris Miller.
Aside from assaulting Alexine, Lena, Aurora, Trip, Kaden, Annex, and Nexer, Alan also brutally assaulted me with a spike bat in Mike Animate's channel. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
What? You two? Alan, what in blazes is wrong with you?
Your Honor, Doris never understood how much trouble the Trick Gang caused. I had to do it for my daughter's safety.
That's no reason for you to assault anyone. You are a menace to society when you do that to women. Anyway, I call upon my next witness, Sam Wiggle.
Alan Jones is a real gaslighter. Aside from what he did back at Springfield, he also forced Michael Dale and Dustin Halifax to make fun of Greg Page for going under cardiac arrest. And Alan, what you did in my channel was completely selfish and heartless. So for that, I find you guilty.
I don't know for sure if it's true or not, but may I call Greg Page up to the stand, please?
What? Greg Page? Alive? How's that even possible? I survived my cardiac arrest, Alan Jones, which by the way, was not something to laugh about.
Wait a minute. Greg, the defendant actually did what Sam Wiggle told me in the jury.
Apparently so, mate. As for you, Alan, I knew Michael Dale and Dustin Halifax made fun of me for it, but I didn't know you make them do it. What you did wasn't nice at all. So for that, I plead you guilty.
What? Are you serious? Alan, have you gone mad? Have you no respect for the elderly? You know what? I think I've heard enough from the Wiggles. You have really crossed a line. I think it's time for me to find out what else you did. Speaking of which, I call upon my next witness, Metalcore Spinosaurus.
Aside from everything Alan did back at Springfield and what he did in Sam Wiggle's channel, he grounded me for everything and grounded Jonathan Young for a dumb reason. Therefore, I say he's guilty.
Thank you, Spinosaurus. I call upon my next two witnesses, Crowtoon Productions Incorporated and Crow Girl 22.
Alan Jones wasn't the good principal Crow Girl 22 and I thought he was. 3 years ago, he started abusing the Trick Gang for all the trouble they caused at Springfield. And out of all the members he assaulted so far, the only person he did it to the most was Trip himself, because during high school, he got beaten up on school grounds twice. And since Alan got Deacon and Simona expelled after that mass assault war between them and the Sage crew, he assaulted Alexine, Kaden, Annex, Nexer, Lena, and Aurora too.
Sure, the Trip gang caused a lot of trouble back at Springfield, and I don't take kindly to racist people, but Alan took it too far by orchestrating most of those mass assaults.
To sum it all up, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And there are principals who have zero tolerance for that kind of violence. And furthermore, Crowgirl 22 and I say Alan's guilty. And one more thing before we go, there's someone else here who would like to testify against Alan.
There is. Who?
The prosecution wishes to call upon the next witness, Andres Davis.
Andres, you're testifying against me? Why?
To make up for the way I treated Alexine.
What? I thought you and Gracie disowned her.
We did, but the thing is, I never wanted to do that nor even abuse Alexine in the first place. It was all Gracie's idea. I disowned Alexine and gave her the belt against my will. And when our kids confronted us, I felt remorse for the way I treated Alexine, and I was worried about Cody and Julian's safety when I found out what my wife's been doing to them.
Wait a minute. Andres, are you saying that your wife's been abusing all 3 of your kids behind your back?
Yes. But compared to how I felt about giving Alexine the belt and disowning her, Alan never hesitated to assault my own first daughter for what she and Trip did to Accio. Therefore, I say he's guilty. And once Gracie stands trial, my kids and I will explain everything she did in full detail.
Okay, Andres. Though I didn't expect this, I guess I should thank you for your testimony. Anyways, I call upon my next witness, Dakota Jones.
Dakota, you better not testify against me. Don't you dare.
Sorry, Alan, but you leave me no choice. Your Honor, Alan's been a bad influence to our daughter Serenity and her friends. He dragged most of them, the police, the parents of the Everett brothers and the Alinsky sisters, and most of his former staff in a series of mass assaults in his own high school. Then in Mike Hanimit's channel, when he got exposed, he assaulted Doris with a spiked bat. And finally, in Master DC King 2009's channel, he assaulted 2 boys named Frederick and Andrew initially for no reason, but also because they criticized the way he ran his school. Therefore, I say he's guilty. And I wanna file him for a divorce. Permanently.
You backstabbing double-crossing witch.
Not so fast. You will not lay one single finger on your soon-to-be ex-wife. And I agree with her. You've set a bad example for your daughter. Speaking of which, Serenity would like to have a word with you.
Dad, I'm very disappointed in you. Yes, Trip harassed me on my first day, but ever since I found out about Sage bullying him when we were kids and how badly his parents treated him, I felt very bad for him. I'm sorry to have to say this, but for all the times you assaulted him and most of his friends, including his girlfriend Alexine, I have no choice but to plead you guilty.
How did it come to this? What have I done?
You've done plenty wrong, Alan. Especially to your own family. So according to all witnesses' stories, I hereby find you guilty. Therefore, I hereby sentence you to 75 years in prison without parole, and you'll be forced to sign the divorce papers. In addition to that, Dakota will have full custody of Serenity. Court adjourned. Officer Riggs, take him away.
All right, Alan, this is your cell. You'll be staying here for 75 years. Don't even think about escaping.
Great. It's bad enough that I lost my job as the principal of my old high school, but now I lost custody of Serenity. Dakota filed me for a divorce, and I'm stuck here for 75 years. And it was all because I gave the Trick Gang what they deserved for everything they did.
Despite all the stuff they did, they never deserved any of those mass assaults. And you were also misogynistic towards Doris, Alexine, and Dakota, and heartless towards Gret Page. You lost everything because you failed as a principal and a father.
Oh, shut up. You're gonna pay for this when I get out of here.
We'll see about that.